A poor little 5-year-old girl asks for help at the door of a mansion, but when the young billionaire opens it, he realizes who she really is, and everything changes in the blink of an eye. The heavy rain battered the large windows of the Anderson mansion, creating an irregular symphony against the glass. Inside the richly decorated study, James Anderson, age 35, worked tirelessly, his eyes fixed on the computer screen illuminating his angular face. The bluish glow contrasted with the dimness of the room, broken only by the soft glow of the lamp on the mahogany desk. James sighed, running a hand through his impeccably styled dark hair. Even at that late hour of the night, his custom-made Italian suit showed not a single wrinkle. He was a man used to long working hours, a habit that had turned him into one of the youngest billionaires in the country. The clock on the wall read 11:47 p.m. The silence of the night was absolute, broken only by the constant drumming of the rain and the occasional distant rumble of thunder. James was about to shut down the computer when an unexpected sound made him freeze. Knock, knock, knock. The knocks on the front door were faint and hesitant, almost inaudible under the roar of the storm. James frowned, wondering if his exhausted mind was playing tricks. Who could be at his door on a night like this? Knock, knock, knock. There they were again, a bit more insistent this time. James stood up, curiosity overcoming caution. He crossed the main hallway, his footsteps echoing on the marble floor. The shadows danced on the walls as he passed, cast by the soft light of the wall sconces. Reaching the imposing front door, James hesitated for a moment. His hand hovered over the ornate handle. An inexplicable shiver ran down his spine. For some reason, he felt that by opening that door, his life would change forever. With a decisive motion, he turned the handle and opened the door. The howling wind and torrential rain nearly blinded him for an instant, blinking away the droplets that hit his face. James lowered his gaze, and there, drenched and shivering, stood a little girl. She couldn't have been more than 5 years old. Her light brown hair clung to her pale face, and her large green eyes stared at him with a mixture of fear and hope. She wore a faded pink pajama set, now completely soaked, and her bare feet were muddy. "Please, sir," she said in a trembling voice, almost inaudible under the roar of the storm. "I'm lost. Can you help me?" James was paralyzed for a moment, shocked by the surreal scene before him. His pragmatic business mind tried to process the situation, but something deeper, more instinctive, urged him to act. "My God, child," he finally exclaimed, kneeling to meet her eyes. "Come in, quickly. You must be freezing." He gently guided her inside, closing the door behind them to block out the howling wind. The little girl shivered violently, her teeth chattering. "What's your name?" James asked softly, trying to stay calm while 1,000 questions exploded in his mind. "Emma," she stammered, her lips trembling from the cold. "Emma," James repeated, and something strange happened when he spoke the name. A feeling of familiarity, almost like déjà vu, washed over him. "I'm James. Let's get you dried off and warmed up, okay?" He grabbed a decorative throw from a nearby sofa and wrapped it around Emma's shoulders. Then, as he leaned in to adjust the fabric, James noticed something that made his heart skip a beat. Emma's face, now more visible under the soft light of the entryway, had features that seemed oddly familiar to him. The curve of her chin, the shape of her eyes. It was like looking at a distorted mirror of the past. James shook his head, pushing these thoughts aside. Now was not the time for speculation. A child needed his help. "Susan!" he called out, his voice echoing through the mansion. "Susan, come here, please. It's urgent." Quick footsteps were soon heard, and Susan, the middle-aged housekeeper who had worked for James for years, appeared at the top of the staircase. Her eyes widened at the unusual scene in the entrance hall. "Oh, heavens!" she exclaimed, hurrying down the stairs. "What happened?" "This is Emma," James explained, his voice betraying a mix of concern and confusion. "She knocked on the door. She's lost and drenched. We need to warm her up and figure out where she came from." Susan, always efficient, sprang into action immediately. "Poor thing," she murmured, approaching Emma with a reassuring smile. "Let's take care of you, dear. How about a hot bath and some dry clothes?" Emma nodded timidly, her eyes still fixed on James, as though he were her lifeline in this sea of confusion. She opened her mouth to say something, but suddenly her eyes rolled back, and her small body collapsed. "Emma!" James shouted, catching her in his arms before she hit the floor. The girl's body was hot, very hot. "Susan, she's burning up with fever. Quick, Mr. Anderson, take her to the guest bedroom," Susan instructed, her voice calm but urgent. "I'll get cold towels and the first aid kit." James didn't hesitate. With Emma unconscious in his arms, he took the stairs 2 at a time, his heart pounding frantically. Her head rested against his arm, and he could feel the heat radiating from her skin through the soaked pajamas. Upon entering the guest bedroom, James gently placed Emma on the king-size bed. She looked even smaller and more fragile against the immaculate white sheets. Her face was flushed from the fever, and small beads of sweat began to form on her forehead. Susan entered the room seconds later, carrying towels, a basin of cold water, and a first aid kit. "We need to get these wet clothes off her, Mr. Anderson," she said, already starting to unbutton Emma's pajama top. James stepped back, feeling simultaneously worried and out of place. I'll call a doctor," he said, grabbing his phone. While Susan tended to Emma, James made a quick call to his private physician, Dr. Michaels. The doctor promised to arrive in 20 minutes, storm or no storm outside. When James turned his attention back to the bed, Susan had already changed Emma into one of her own nightgowns, several sizes too big for the little girl, but dry and comfortable. A cold towel rested on Emma's forehead, and Susan was checking her temperature with a thermometer. 103.1 degrees, Susan reported, her voice tinged with concern. "That's very high, Mr. Anderson." James felt a knot form in his stomach. "Dr. Michaels is on his way," he said, more to himself than to Susan. He approached the bed, watching Emma's feverish face. How could this happen? Where did she come from? Why was she alone on a night like this? Susan shook her head, replacing the towel on Emma's forehead with a colder one. "We don't know, sir. But the important thing now is to take care of her. The answers will come in time." The minutes that followed seemed to drag on forever. James paced back and forth in the room, or sat on the edge of the bed, anxiously watching each of Emma's breaths. Susan worked quietly, changing out cold towels and monitoring the girl's temperature. Finally, the doorbell rang, echoing through the mansion. James ran to answer, guiding Dr. Michaels, a middle-aged man with graying hair and an air of calm competence, up to the bedroom. The doctor examined Emma thoroughly, his face a mask of professional concentration. After what felt like an eternity, he turned to James and Susan. "She has a pretty serious case of pneumonia," Dr. Michaels informed them. "Her fever is high, but still manageable. I'll prescribe antibiotics and fever reducers. She'll need constant monitoring for the next 24 to 48 hours. James nodded, feeling a mix of relief and renewed worry. "She's going to be okay, Doctor." Dr. Michaels offered a small, reassuring smile. "Children are surprisingly resilient, Mr. Anderson. With the right care, she should make a full recovery. But," he added, his tone more serious, "we need to know more about her medical history. Do you know who her parents are?" James and Susan exchanged glances. "No, Doctor," James replied. She showed up at my door less than an hour ago. We know nothing about her besides her name. Emma." The doctor frowned, clearly troubled by this information. "I see. Well, for now, we'll treat what we can see. I'll leave prescriptions and detailed instructions. If her fever doesn't go down in the next 12 hours, or if she shows any signs of worsening, call me immediately." After Dr. Michaels left, leaving behind a list of instructions and medications, James sank into the armchair beside the bed. Susan had gone to the nearest 24-hour pharmacy to buy the prescribed medicines. James watched Emma's sleeping face, his mind a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions. Who was this girl? How had she ended up on his doorstep? And why, despite all the bizarre circumstances, Did he feel such a strong connection to her? The early hours of the morning passed slowly. The storm outside had reduced to a gentle, steady rain, creating a melancholy melody that served as the backdrop to James's reflections. Susan returned with the medications, and together they administered the first dose to Emma, who was semi-conscious. The girl swallowed the liquid without resistance, only muttering something unintelligible before slipping back into a deep sleep. "Mr. Anderson," Susan said softly, noticing the evident fatigue on her employer's face, "why don't you get some rest?" "I can keep an eye on her." James shook his head. "No, Susan, you've done enough tonight. Go get some rest. I'll stay with her." Susan hesitated, clearly reluctant to leave James alone in this situation, but her years of working for him had taught her when not to argue. "All right, sir, but please call me if you need anything at all." After Susan left, James found himself alone with Emma and his thoughts. The only sounds in the room were the girl's soft breathing and the occasional drip of rain outside. James stood and walked to the window, watching the darkness outside gradually give way to the first grey shades of dawn. His mind drifted back over the night's events, replaying every detail, searching for any clue that might make sense of this surreal situation. He was James Anderson, one of the most successful businessmen of his generation. By 35, he had built a financial empire that rivaled those of more established magnates. His life was a series of board meetings, multi-million-dollar deals, and front-page headlines in the financial papers. And now, here he was, keeping vigil over the feverish sleep of an unknown child who had literally knocked at his door. James turned, his eyes once more falling on Emma's sleeping face. Even in the dim light of the room, he could see the similarities that had struck him earlier. The curve of the chin, the shape of the eyes. They were features he knew well, ones he saw every time he looked in the mirror. But that was impossible, wasn't it? He had no children. Never had. His life, devoted to business, didn't allow room for long-term relationships, let alone a family. Nevertheless, as he watched Emma, a growing unease began to form in his chest, a mix of fear, curiosity, and hope. James shook his head, trying to banish these confused thoughts. He returned to the armchair beside the bed, gently adjusting the cold towel on Emma's forehead. Her fever seemed to have gone down slightly, but her face was still flushed, and though her breathing was more regular, it was still somewhat labored. The hours crawled by, and James found himself lost in a whirlwind of emotions and unanswered questions. Who was this mysterious child who had appeared on his doorstep? Why did he feel such a strong bond with her? And what fate awaited them now? As the sun began to rise on the horizon, James knew his life had changed irrevocably. Whatever the future held, he was determined to uncover the truth about Emma and, most importantly, to protect her at all costs. With that resolve in mind, James settled into the armchair, his eyes never leaving Emma's sleeping face, waiting for the moment when she would finally awaken and perhaps begin to unravel the mystery of her arrival. The room was bathed in a comforting silence, broken only by Emma's soft breathing and the occasional birdsong that announced the new day outside. James felt the weight of exhaustion on his shoulders, but he refused to sleep. Each time his eyes threatened to close, he forced them open, determined to be awake when Emma finally stirred. As he watched the little girl's face, James couldn't help but notice how peaceful she looked despite the fever. Her light brown curls framed her face like a halo, and her small hands lay in loose fists atop the blanket. It was an image of innocence and vulnerability that touched something deep within him, something he didn't even know existed. The hours passed, and the sun climbed higher in the sky. Susan returned to check on Emma and change her compresses, insisting that James eat something and rest for a bit. He politely refused, but did accept a cup of strong coffee. As the day wore on, James found himself imagining scenarios, spinning stories in his mind about who Emma might be and where she had come from. Each theory seemed more improbable than the last, yet he couldn't stop speculating. It was in the midst of these daydreams that James noticed a subtle change. Emma's breathing shifted slightly, and her eyes began moving beneath her closed eyelids. He leaned forward, heart pounding with anticipation. Slowly, very slowly, Emma's eyes began to open. Confused at first, they roamed around the room until they settled on James. For a moment, the two simply stared at each other, green meeting blue, in a silence heavy with unspoken questions. James opened his mouth to speak, but before he could say anything, Emma blinked slowly and her eyes closed again, exhaustion overcoming her once more. Letting out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding, James leaned back in the armchair. Emma had awakened, even if only briefly. It was a good sign, Dr. Michaels had said. Now it was just a matter of time and patience. With a deep sigh, James allowed himself to relax a bit. The mystery of Emma was far from solved, but at least now he knew she was on the road to recovery. And while she slept, healing from the mysterious journey that had brought her to his door, James would do everything in his power to ensure that when she truly awoke, she would find safety, comfort, and, most importantly, answers. The first chapter of James and Emma's story had just begun, and the pages that followed promised to be full of revelations, emotions, and perhaps the awakening of a paternal love James never knew he could feel. As the sun continued its journey across the sky, the Anderson mansion sheltered its two main occupants. A man lost in thought and a little girl lost in sleep, brought together by a fate neither could have predicted, but which would change their lives forever. The morning sun filtered through the curtains of the guest bedroom, casting a gentle glow on Emma's face. James, who had finally yielded to fatigue and dozed off in the armchair beside the bed, woke with a slight stir. His eyes opened to find Emma's curious gaze fixed on him. Her fever had subsided considerably, and though she still looked fragile, her bright green eyes now held a renewed spark of life. "Good morning," James said softly, leaning forward. "How are you feeling, Emma?" The girl hesitated for a moment before replying in a raspy voice. "Better, I think. Where am I?" James gently explained the events of the previous night, watching Emma's reactions closely. When he finished, he carefully asked, "Emma, can you tell me how you ended up at my door last night?" Emma bit her lip, her eyes filling with tears. I got lost," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "Mom and I live in a shelter. She's been sick for a long time and can't work." James felt his heart tighten at the girl's story. "What happened last night?" "Mom wasn't feeling well," Emma continued. "We had no food and I thought I could find something. But it was dark and raining, and I couldn't find my way back." As Emma spoke, James noticed details in her story that intrigued him. The location of the shelter, the description of her mother's illness, even certain mannerisms Emma used as she spoke. Everything seemed strangely familiar. "Emma," James asked hesitantly, "what's your mom's name?" "Sarah," Emma answered, and James felt as though the air had been knocked from his lungs. The coincidences were too many to ignore. Sarah. The same name as his ex-girlfriend from years ago. Emma's age lined up perfectly, and those physical similarities he had noticed. "James," Emma's voice pulled him from his thoughts, "will you help me find my mom?" James swallowed hard, trying to maintain his composure. "Of course, Emma. We'll do everything we can to find her." At that moment, Susan entered the room carrying a breakfast tray. James took the opportunity to compose himself, his mind spinning with the implications of what he had just heard. While Emma ate, under Susan's watchful eye, James stepped out of the room to make a phone call. "Robert, it's James Anderson. I need your services immediately. It's a personal matter, extremely delicate." Hanging up the phone, James glanced back at the room where Emma lay. The pieces of the puzzle were beginning to come together, but he needed to be sure if his suspicions were correct, his life was about to change drastically. With a deep sigh, James prepared himself for the revelations to come. The mystery surrounding Emma was just beginning to unfold, and he was determined to find the truth, no matter the cost. Returning to the room, James found Emma finishing her breakfast. She seemed more alert, but there was still a shadow of worry in her eyes. "Emma," he said gently, sitting on the edge of the bed, "I promise we'll find your mom. I have a friend who's going to help us look for her." The girl nodded, a small smile brightening her face. "Thank you, James. You're very kind." James felt a lump in his throat. The gratitude in Emma's eyes was almost too much to bear, especially considering the suspicions now occupying his mind. "While we wait for news," he continued, trying to keep his voice steady, "can you tell me more about you and your mum? Any detail might help us find her faster." Emma agreed and began sharing more stories about her life in the shelter. Every word she spoke seemed to confirm James's suspicions, increasing both his anxiety and anticipation. When Emma finally finished talking, exhausted from the conversation, James helped her settle back into bed. "Get some more rest," he said, adjusting the covers. "I'll be here if you need anything." Watching Emma drift back to sleep, James felt the full weight of the situation on his shoulders. The coincidences were too many to ignore. The possibility that Emma might be his daughter, a daughter he never knew existed, was both terrifying and thrilling. With one last glance at the sleeping girl, James slipped quietly from the room. He had much to do and much to think about. Robert's investigation would be crucial in confirming his suspicions, but James already felt, deep in his heart, that his life had changed forever. The mystery of Emma was far from solved, yet James was determined to uncover the truth at any cost. With determined steps, he headed to his office, ready to face whatever the future might hold. James's office was dimly lit, the late afternoon sun filtering through the windows. He was sitting at his desk, eyes fixed on an old photo he held in trembling hands. In the picture, a young Sarah smiled at the camera, her green eyes shining with the same intensity James now saw in Emma. A soft knock on the door brought him back to the present. "Come in," he called, quickly storing the photo in a drawer. Robert Dew, the private investigator, entered the office. He was a middle-aged man with graying hair and keen eyes that seemed to note every detail of his surroundings. "James," he greeted with a nod, "I received the information you sent. I've already started the investigation." James stood up, anxious. "So, any news?" Robert frowned. "It's still early, but we have a few leads. We're checking every shelter in the city that matches Emma's description." As Robert shared the initial details of his investigation, James's mind wandered. Memories of his past with Sarah flooded his consciousness. A picnic in the park, Sarah's laughter echoing in the air, a heated argument about his career plans, Sarah's eyes burning with determination, the last kiss they shared, bittersweet and heavy with unfulfilled promises. "James?" Robert's voice pulled him back to reality. "Are you all right?" James shook his head, trying to focus. "Yes, sorry, please continue." As Robert detailed his next steps in the investigation, a light knock on the door interrupted them. Susan entered, wearing a concerned expression. "Excuse me for interrupting, Mr. Anderson, but Emma is asking for you. She seems a bit upset." James stood immediately. "Thank you, Susan." "Robert, can we continue this later?" The investigator nodded in understanding. "Of course. I'll keep searching and keep you updated." James headed upstairs quickly, his mind torn between worry for Emma and anxiety about the revelations that might come. Entering the room, he found Emma sitting on the bed, hugging her knees. "Emma? Is everything okay?" he asked gently, taking a seat beside her. The girl looked up at him with teary eyes. I remembered more things about the shelter. I thought it could help find my mum." James felt his heart tighten. "Of course, dear. Any detail can help. Tell me what you remembered." As Emma spoke, describing the neighborhood where the shelter was located, mentioning a nearby park and a church with a distinctive bell, James felt every word resonate in his memory. He knew that place. It was the same neighborhood where he and Sarah used to walk years ago. James's suspicions crystallized with each new piece of information. The physical resemblance, Emma's age, the familiar locations. It all pointed to a truth he hardly dared to believe. When Emma finished speaking, James gently embraced her. Thank you for telling me this, Emma. It'll help us a lot in finding your mom. Leaving the room, James grabbed his phone and called Robert. Robert, I think I know where the shelter is. Write down this address. As he provided the details, James felt a mix of emotions: anxiety, hope, fear. The mystery was about to be revealed, and he wasn't sure if he was ready for the answers that would follow. Hanging up, James looked out the window, watching the sun set on the horizon. Tomorrow they would go to the shelter. Tomorrow, he might finally discover the truth about Emma and Sarah. And tomorrow his life could change forever. Sarah hesitated, her hands trembling slightly over the table. James resisted the urge to reach out and offer comfort. There was a distance between them that went beyond the physical, years of silence and unanswered questions hanging in the air. James, Sarah began again, her voice firmer this time. I don't even know where to start, seeing you here after all this time, and with Emma. Her voice faltered, and James saw tears welling in her eyes. He wanted to say something, anything, to ease the palpable tension between them, but words felt inadequate. A faint sound from the adjacent room made them freeze. Emma stirred in her sleep, muttering something unintelligible before calming again. Sarah immediately rose and moved toward the bedroom. James followed silently, stopping at the door as Sarah approached the bed where Emma slept. The scene before him took his breath away. Sarah sat on the edge of the bed, gently stroking Emma's hair. The love and devotion in her eyes were almost tangible. She means everything to me, James, Sarah whispered, without taking her eyes off Emma. Every day of the past 5 years, every decision I made was for her. James felt a knot form in his throat. She's an incredible little girl, Sarah. You've done an amazing job raising her. Sarah looked at him, surprised by the kindness in his voice. For a moment, the air between them seemed to soften, the barriers lowering slightly. Thank you, she said quietly, for taking care of her when I couldn't, for bringing her back to me. James nodded, unable to find words to express the whirlwind of emotions he felt. Seeing Sarah and Emma together, their unbreakable bond, made him feel both a part of it and like an outsider. Emma shifted again, her eyes slowly opening. Mom, she mumbled sleepily. I'm here, sweetheart, Sarah replied, leaning in to kiss Emma's forehead. Everything's okay. You're safe now, Emma smiled, her eyes drifting around the room until they found James standing in the doorway. James, you stayed. James felt his heart constrict at the joy in Emma's voice. I promised I'd stay, didn't I? Emma nodded eagerly, sitting up in bed. Mom, can James stay for dinner? Please. Sarah hesitated, looking from Emma to James. There were so many unanswered questions between them, so many things that needed to be said. But Emma's hopeful smile was impossible to resist. If James wants to stay, Sarah said at last, he's welcome. James felt the weight of those words. It wasn't just an invitation to dinner, it was an opening, a chance to be part of their lives, even if for now it was just as the man who had helped Emma. I'd love to, he replied, smiling at Emma, though his eyes remained on Sarah. Emma jumped off the bed, excited at the prospect of having James for dinner. Sarah rose slowly. For a moment, they stood face to face, the air between them charged with unspoken emotions and unasked questions. James, Sarah began in a low voice so Emma wouldn't hear. There's so much we need to talk about. James nodded, understanding the weight behind her words. I know, Sarah, and we will. But for now, how about we focus on Emma? Give her a calm evening after everything she's been through. Sarah seemed relieved by the suggestion, a small smile touching her lips. Thank you, James, for everything. Following Emma to the shelter's modest kitchen, James felt a mix of emotions engulf him. Joy at seeing Emma happy and safe, gratitude that Sarah had allowed him to stay, and a growing hope that perhaps this was the beginning of something new for them all. The future was still uncertain, full of difficult conversations and truths that needed to be revealed. But for that evening, as they gathered around the table for a simple meal, there was a sense of possibility in the air. Maybe, just maybe, The broken pieces of their lives could finally begin to fit together again. And at the center of it all was Emma, the little girl who, without realizing it, had brought James back into Sarah's life, offering them both a second chance neither had ever expected. Night fell softly over the shelter, casting long shadows and silence across the small building. Inside, in the modest communal kitchen, James, Sarah, and Emma finished their dinner. The air was charged with a strange mix of comfort and tension, comfort in sharing a meal, and tension in the many truths left unspoken. Emma, blissfully unaware of the complexity of the situation, chattered happily between bites, her eyes bright as she switched her gaze between James and Sarah. For her, this moment was pure joy, having her mom back and the kind man who rescued her together at the same table. And then James told me a story about a dragon that couldn't fly but learned how with the help of a tiny butterfly, Emma exclaimed, gesturing enthusiastically with her fork. Sarah smiled, brushing a strand of her daughter's hair. That sounds like a wonderful story, sweetheart. James watched their interaction, feeling a rush of emotion swell within him. There was something so natural, so right in seeing Sarah and Emma together. And yet he couldn't ignore the growing sense that he was part of this picture somehow. When Emma finished her dinner, Sarah gently suggested she go brush her teeth and get ready for bed. "But I don't want James to leave yet," Emma protested, her lower lip trembling slightly. James leaned in, smiling reassuringly at the little girl. "Don't worry, Emma. I promise I'll still be here when you come back. We have some important things to talk about with your mum, okay?" Emma nodded, seeming satisfied with his promise. She gave James a quick hug before running off to the bathroom, leaving the adults alone in the kitchen. The silence that followed was heavy, loaded with years of secrets and unanswered questions. Sarah rose, starting to clear the dishes, her hands trembling slightly. "Let me help," James offered, standing up as well. Together they cleared the table in silence, the familiarity of the task contrasting sharply with the tension in the air. When they finished, Sarah turned to James, her eyes filled with a mix of fear and determination. "James," she began, her voice barely above a whisper, "there's something we need to talk about, something that should have been said a long time ago." James felt his heart race. He had suspected, of course. The similarities between him and Emma were hard to ignore, but hearing the confirmation, he wasn't sure if he was prepared for it. "Sarah," he replied, his own voice husky with emotion, "whatever it is, I'm ready to listen." Sarah took a deep breath, as though gathering courage. "Maybe we should sit down." They moved to the small living area next to the kitchen, sitting on opposite ends of a worn but clean sofa. The space between them felt vast, yet at the same time insignificant compared to the weight of what was coming. "James," Sarah began again, meeting his gaze, Emma is your daughter." The words hung in the air for a moment, heavy and irreversible. James felt as though the world had stopped spinning. Part of him already knew, of course. He had suspected it from the moment he saw Emma, but hearing it out loud, that was entirely different. My daughter," he repeated, his voice barely a whisper. Sarah nodded, tears forming in her eyes. "Yes, I found out I was pregnant a few weeks after the last time we saw each other. I tried to reach out to you, but..." Her voice failed, and James saw the pain in her eyes, a pain he had inadvertently caused. "Why didn't you insist?" James asked, his mind reeling with the implications of this revelation. "Why didn't you come straight to me?" Sarah looked away, twisting her hands in her lap. "I tried, James. I called your office countless times, left messages, but you were so busy with your career, with the company merger." James closed his eyes, memories of that time flooding his mind. He had been so focused on proving himself, on building his empire, that he had shut out everyone and everything around him. "I should have realized," he murmured, guilt consuming him. "I should have paid more attention." Sarah shook her head, a sad smile on her lips. "We both made mistakes, James. I should have tried harder, should have gone to you in person. But I was scared, confused. And then things got complicated." James looked at her, realizing there was more to this story than Sarah was revealing at the moment, but he decided not to press her. Right now, Emma was what mattered most. "Sarah," he said softly, "I'm sorry. I'm sorry I wasn't there, that I didn't see what was happening. But I'm here now, and I want to be a part of Emma's life. If you'll let me." Sarah studied him for a long moment, as though searching for any hint of doubt on his face. "Are you sure, James? Your life is going to change completely. Being a father isn't easy, especially when you enter a child's life after so many years." "I'm absolutely sure," James responded without hesitation. "I know it won't be easy, that I have a lot to learn. But I want to try. For Emma. For all three of us." Sarah slowly nodded, a small smile forming on her lips. "Okay, we can try. But James, we have to take it slowly. Emma's been through so much, and I don't want her to get hurt again." James agreed, feeling a mixture of relief and anxiety. "Of course. We'll go at Emma's pace. I just want the chance to know her, to be part of her life." At that moment, the sound of soft footsteps drew their attention. Emma appeared in the doorway, dressed in faded but clean pajamas, her hair still damp from her bath. "Mom? James?" she called, her voice sleepy. "Are you still here?" Sarah opened her arms, and Emma rushed over to snuggle against her side on the sofa. James watched the scene, feeling a surge of love so intense it nearly took his breath away. "We're here, sweetheart," Sarah answered, kissing the top of Emma's head. "Actually, we have something important to tell you." Emma looked from Sarah to James, curiosity shining in her bright green eyes. Eyes that, James now realized, were an exact replica of his own. "What is it, Mom?" Emma asked. Sarah exchanged a glance with James, seeking confirmation. He nodded encouragingly. "Emma, honey," Sarah began softly, "remember how you've always asked about your father?" Emma nodded, her eyes widening slightly. "Well," Sarah continued, "it turns out your dad is closer than we thought." She paused, looking at James. "In fact, he's right here." Emma followed her mother's gaze, her eyes settling on James. For a moment, there was only silence as the little girl processed the information. "James is my dad?" she finally asked, her voice barely a whisper. James felt his heart race. This was the moment. Slowly, he knelt in front of Emma, so he was at eye level. "Yes, Emma," he said gently. "I'm your dad, and I'm sorry I wasn't here before. But I'm here now, if you'll have me in your life." Emma looked at him for a long moment, her green eyes, so much like his, searching his face. Then, without warning, she lunged forward, throwing her arms around James in a tight hug. "I knew it!" she exclaimed, her voice muffled against James's chest. "I knew there was something special about you." James felt tears burn his eyes as he wrapped Emma in his arms. He looked at Sarah over the girl's head, seeing that she, too, was crying silently. "I'm here now, Emma," James murmured, his voice thick with emotion, "and I promise I'm not going anywhere." The next few minutes were a blur of hugs, tears, and whispered promises. Emma clung to James, then returned to Sarah's arms, as though wanting to make sure both were truly there. Once the initial wave of emotion passed, they settled on the sofa, Emma curled between James and Sarah. The girl was full of questions, her eyes shining with curiosity and excitement. "Why weren't you here before?" she asked James, her voice free of accusation, just childlike curiosity. James exchanged a glance with Sarah before responding. "It's complicated, Emma. Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes and decisions that hurt others without meaning to. But what matters is that I'm here now, and I really want to be part of your life if you'll let me." Emma seemed to consider this for a moment, then solemnly nodded. "Okay, but you have to learn how to braid hair. Mom always says Dad should know how to braid hair." James laughed, feeling his heart swell with love for this little person. "I promise I'll practice every day until I'm perfect at it." As the night went on, they continued talking, with James absorbing every detail about Emma's life, her likes, fears, and dreams. Sarah watched their interaction with a mixture of joy and apprehension, clearly happy to see Emma so excited, but also cautious about what the future might bring. During a lull in the conversation, James noticed something. Sarah seemed pale, tired in a way that went beyond emotional stress. "Sarah," he said gently, "are you feeling okay?" Sarah forced a smile, but James could see the tension in her eyes. "I'm fine, just a bit tired." Emma, however, looked at her mother with concern. "Mom, did you take your medicine today?" James felt his heart tighten. "Medicine, Sarah, what's going on?" Sarah sighed, running a hand over her tired face. "It's nothing, James. Just a heart condition I've been treating for the last few years." But James could see by Emma's expression that it was more than nothing. "Sarah, please. If something is wrong, I want to help." Sarah hesitated, glancing at Emma, who now looked anxious. "Emma, sweetheart, could you get me a glass of water?" Emma nodded, clearly reluctant to leave her mother's side, but obeyed. As soon as she left the room, Sarah turned to James, her expression serious. "James, I have a heart condition," she said quietly. "It's not immediately life-threatening, but it does require constant treatment. Treatment that, well, I can't always afford." James felt as though he'd been punched in the stomach. The thought of Sarah not only raising Emma on her own, but also dealing with health issues was almost unbearable. "Why didn't you come to me?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion. "I would have helped, Sarah. You know that." Sarah gave a sad smile. "Things were complicated, James, and I didn't want to be a burden." "A burden?" James repeated, incredulous. "Sarah, you're the mother of my child. You could never be a burden." At that moment, Emma returned with a glass of water. Sarah took it with a grateful smile, sipping slowly. James watched the interaction, his mind racing. He couldn't change the past. He couldn't erase the years they'd lost, but he could do something about the future. "Sarah," he said, his voice firm with determination, "I want to help. With your treatment, with everything, please let me do this." Sarah hesitated, looking at Emma, who was now watching them with wide eyes. "James, I can't accept—" "Yes, you can," James insisted gently. "Not for me, but for Emma. She deserves to have her mom healthy and happy." Emma, realizing what was happening, joined the conversation. "Please, Mom," she pleaded, "let Dad help." The use of the word Dad took James by surprise, sending a wave of emotion through him. Sarah also seemed affected, her eyes filling with tears. "Okay," she finally agreed, her voice low. "But let's take it one step at a time, all right?" James nodded, feeling an immense sense of relief. "One step at a time," he echoed. "And the first step is getting you the treatment you need." In the days that followed, James threw himself wholeheartedly into his new reality. He helped Sarah find the best doctors, made sure she had access to all the necessary medications, and, most importantly, spent every moment possible with Emma. The transition was not easy. There were moments of discomfort, uncertainty. James made mistakes, stumbled through his new role as a father, but each day, with every smile from Emma and every small improvement in Sarah's health, he felt they were on the right path. 2 weeks after the revelation, James found an apartment close to the shelter. It was spacious, comfortable, with enough bedrooms for everyone. Morning sunlight filtered through the curtains of the new apartment, casting a golden glow across Emma's sleeping face. James stood in the doorway of his daughter's room, watching quietly, marveling at the peace emanating from the little figure tucked under the sheets. It was hard to believe that only a month had passed since that stormy night when Emma knocked on his door. In such a short time, his life had been completely turned upside down and, surprisingly, he couldn't have been happier. A slight noise in the kitchen caught his attention. Slipping silently away from Emma's door, James followed the sound, finding Sarah preparing breakfast. "Good morning," he said softly, not wanting to startle her. Sarah turned, a small smile on her lips. "Good morning, James. Coffee?" He nodded, accepting the cup she offered. For a moment, they stood in silence, savoring the familiarity of this new morning ritual. "How are you feeling today?" James asked, his eyes studying Sarah's face. Since she had started treatment for her heart condition, he noticed every subtle change, every sign of improvement or fatigue. Sarah shrugged partistimi, but her smile was genuine. "Better. Doctor, Patel says the new medication is working. I still get tired easily, but it's progress." James felt a wave of relief wash over him. Sarah's treatment had become his top priority, and seeing signs of improvement was more rewarding than any business deal he had ever closed. "I'm glad to hear that," he said, resisting the urge to reach out and touch her face. There was a delicate line between them, a newly rediscovered closeness mingled with years of distance. It was a delicate balance they were both learning to navigate. The sound of hurried footsteps interrupted the moment. Emma burst into the kitchen, her hair a bit messy but her face shining with a bright smile. "Good morning, Mom. Good morning, Dad," she exclaimed, hugging Sarah first and then James. James's heart warmed at hearing Emma call him Dad. It was still new, something that caught him by surprise every time, filling him with an indescribable joy. "Good morning, Princess," he responded, kissing the top of her head. "Ready for the big day?" Emma's eyes widened with a mix of excitement and nervousness. "I think so. What if the other kids don't like me?" Sarah knelt beside her daughter, smoothing a lock of her hair. "They'll love you, sweetheart. Just be yourself." James watched, feeling a pang of guilt for all the moments like this he'd missed, but he was determined to make up for lost time. "Your mom's right, Emma," he added. "And remember, if you need anything, just call us. We'll be there in a heartbeat." Emma nodded, looking a bit more confident. As she ate her breakfast, James and Sarah exchanged glances. This was a big step for all of them. Emma starting at a new school, Sarah beginning her full-time treatment, and James reorganizing his professional life entirely to accommodate his new family. Half an hour later, the three of them were in the car, on their way to Emma's new school. The drive was filled with Emma's animated voice, listing all the things she hoped to do and learn. When they arrived at the school gates, Emma hesitated for a moment. James's heart ached at the fear in his daughter's eyes. "Hey," he said gently, kneeling to meet her gaze. "You're going to do great. And remember, Mom and I will be waiting when school's over." Emma threw her arms around him, and James felt tears prick at his eyes. When she pulled away, there was determination in her gaze. "Okay," she said, "I can do this." With one last hug for Sarah, Emma walked toward the gate, her little backpack bouncing on her back. James and Sarah stood side by side, watching until she disappeared into the building. "She'll be fine," Sarah murmured, more to herself than to James. He nodded, gently placing a hand on her shoulder. "Yes, she will. She's strong like her mom." Sarah looked at him, a soft smile on her lips. For a moment, James felt that familiar spark between them, the same one he'd felt years ago when he first fell in love. Clearing his throat, he broke the moment. "Shall we go? We need to get you to your appointment." The rest of the day was a blur of activity. While Sarah was at her medical appointment, James used the time to reorganize his work schedule. He had decided to drastically reduce his office hours, prioritizing time with Emma and Sarah. His assistant, Clara, seemed a bit startled by all the sudden changes. "Are you sure about this, Mr. Anderson?" she asked, worry evident in her voice. "These meetings are crucial for the merger with the Johnson Company." James smiled, feeling a peace he hadn't felt in years. "I'm sure, Clara. The merger can wait. My family can't." Family. The word still sounded strange on his lips, yet at the same time, incredibly right. When he picked Sarah up after her appointment, he found her chatting animatedly with a nurse. Her cheeks were flushed not from fatigue, but from excitement. "James," she exclaimed upon seeing him, "Dr. Patel said my treatment is progressing better than expected. If things keep going like this, in a few months I might even consider going back to work part-time." The joy in her voice was contagious. Without thinking, James pulled her into an embrace, laughing alongside her. When they pulled apart, there was a sparkle in her eyes he hadn't seen in years. "That's wonderful, Sarah," he said, his voice full of emotion. "Let's celebrate. How about a special lunch before we pick up Emma?" Lunch was a cheerful affair, with Sarah sharing more details about her treatment and James talking about the changes at work. There was a comfort in their conversation, a familiarity that transcended the years of separation. When it was time to pick up Emma, both of them were eager to know how her first day had gone. They found her in the schoolyard, chatting happily with two other girls. Spotting her parents, Emma ran toward them, a huge smile on her face. "Mom, Dad, it was amazing. I made 2 new friends, Lily and Sophia, and the teacher said she really liked my drawing," and James and Sarah exchanged looks of relief and joy as Emma rattled on excitedly. On the way home, she didn't stop talking for a second, sharing every detail of her day. That night, after putting Emma to bed, James and Sarah met in the living room, each holding a cup of tea. "It was a big day," James commented, breaking the comfortable silence between them. Sarah nodded, a soft smile on her lips. "Yes, it was." "James, I wanted to thank you for everything, for the treatment, for Emma's school, for this apartment, for being here." James felt his heart race at the sincerity in her voice. "Sarah, you don't need to thank me. Emma is our daughter. You are—" He hesitated, unsure how to define what Sarah was to him now. "You're my family." Sarah looked at him, her eyes shining with unspoken emotion. For a moment, James felt an overwhelming urge to lean in and kiss her, to revive the connection they had shared years ago. But the moment passed, and both looked away, aware of the complexity of their situation. "Good night, James," Sarah said softly, standing up. "Good night, Sarah," he replied, watching her leave the room. Alone, James reflected on the day, on the changes in his life. There were still challenges ahead, of course, adapting to this new family dynamic, balancing work and personal life, navigating the resurfacing feelings for Sarah. None of it would be easy. But as he thought of Emma's smile, Sarah's determination, and the sense of purpose he felt now, James knew every challenge was worth it. With a contented sigh, he got up, ready to face whatever tomorrow brought. Because now, for the first time in a long while, he wasn't facing the future alone. He had a family. The following weeks were a whirlwind of adjustments and discoveries for the newly formed Anderson family. James, used to the strict routine of the corporate world, found himself navigating the organized chaos of life with a 5-year-old. Every morning, he and Sarah performed a carefully choreographed dance, preparing breakfast, helping Emma get dressed, ensuring all her school materials were in her backpack, and getting out the door in time for the start of classes. "Emma, did you grab your lunch?" James asked one particularly hectic morning. "Yes, Dad," Emma's muffled voice answered as she struggled to tie her shoelaces. James smiled, still marveling at how easily Emma called him Dad. He knelt beside her, gently moving her hands aside. "Here, let me help." While he tied Emma's shoelaces, Sarah walked into the room looking a bit pale but resolute. "Is everyone ready?" James glanced at her with concern. "Are you sure you want to come with us today? You look tired." Sarah forced a smile. "I'm fine. Dr. Patel said it's normal to feel a bit exhausted with the new medication. Besides, I don't want to miss family day at Emma's school." Emma jumped excitedly. "Yes, we'll show my drawings to Dad." James's heart warmed at Emma's enthusiasm. He stood, instinctively extending a hand to help Sarah. For a moment, their hands touched, and James felt that familiar electric current between them. Sarah blinked, seeming equally affected by the contact. They quickly separated, but the moment did not go unnoticed. In the car on the way to the school, James couldn't help noticing how tired Sarah looked. He made a mental note to speak to Dr. Patel about the medication's side effects. Family day at Emma's school was a surreal experience for James, sitting in a chair too small for him beside Sarah, watching Emma proudly present her art projects. He felt a tidal wave of emotions. "And this," Emma said, holding up a colorful drawing, "is our family. Look, Dad, I drew you as tall as a giant." James laughed. noticing that Emma had drawn him almost twice Sarah's size. "It's wonderful, Emma. We can hang it on the fridge when we get home, okay?" Emma nodded eagerly before running off to show the drawing to her classmates. "She looks so happy," Sarah commented quietly. James looked at her, noticing the glint of tears in her eyes. "Hey," he said gently, placing a hand over hers. "Are you okay?" Sarah quickly wiped her eyes. "Yes, it's emotional, you know? Seeing her so settled, so happy. And having you here." Her voice trailed off, and James felt his heart tighten. Without thinking, he pulled her into a hug, ignoring the curious gazes of other parents around them. "I'm here now," he murmured into her hair, "and I'm not going anywhere." When they pulled apart, a soft flush colored Sarah's cheeks, and James felt heat creeping up his own face. The moment was cut short by Emma, who ran over, eager to show them more of her work. The rest of the day passed in a blur of school activities, with James and Sarah taking turns participating in games and projects with Emma. Despite her evident fatigue, Sarah insisted on staying until the end. That night, after putting Emma to bed, James found Sarah on the apartment balcony, gazing thoughtfully at the city lights. "Hey, Penny, for your thoughts," he said softly, offering her a cup of tea. Sarah accepted the cup with a grateful smile. "I was just thinking about how much things have changed so quickly. A few weeks ago, I could barely imagine giving Emma a stable life, and now..." "Now," James prompted. "Now sometimes I catch myself wondering if it's all real," she admitted. "If I won't suddenly wake up and find out it was all a dream." James stepped closer, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "It's real, Sarah. We're here, all of us." She turned to look at him, and James was struck by the vulnerability in her eyes. "James, I don't know how to thank you for everything you've done." "You don't need to thank me," he replied, his voice husky with emotion. "Sarah, you gave me the greatest gift possible, our daughter. All I'm doing is trying to make up for lost time." They stood in silence for a moment, the air between them charged with unspoken emotion. James felt the familiar urge to lean in and kiss her, to rekindle that connection they once shared. But he hesitated, mindful of their current complexities. Sarah seemed to sense the tension too. She took a step back, breaking the moment. "We should get some sleep," she said quietly. "Tomorrow will be another busy day." James nodded, feeling a mix of relief and disappointment. "You're right. Good night, Sarah." "Good night, James," she replied, casting him one last glance before heading inside. Alone on the balcony, James reflected on the past few weeks. The adjustment hadn't been easy for any of them. He was learning how to be a father, navigating unknown territory daily. Sarah was coping with her treatment, battling fatigue and side effects, and Emma, sweet Emma, was adapting to a new school, a new home, and the sudden presence of a father in her life. Yet despite the challenges, James had never felt more alive. Every one of Emma's smiles, every small step forward in Sarah's health, every shared family moment, they all filled a void no business success had ever touched. And then there was Sarah. James couldn't ignore the feelings that resurfaced whenever they were together. The ease of their interaction, the way she understood him with just a glance, the electricity that still seemed to crackle between them. It was as though the years of separation had evaporated, leaving only the core of who they were to each other. But things were different now. They were no longer two young people in love, facing the future with endless possibilities. They were parents, with responsibilities and a complicated past. Any step toward a romantic relationship would have to be carefully considered, for their sake and for Emma's. With a sigh, James slipped back into the apartment, quietly closing the balcony door behind him. In the hallway, he paused for a moment outside Emma's room, listening to her soft, steady breathing. A smile touched his lips at how drastically his life had changed in such a short time. Lying in bed that night, James mulled over the future. There was still much to resolve, many adjustments to be made, but for the first time in years, he felt truly at peace. Whatever tomorrow brought, he knew he would face it with his family by his side. With that comforting thought, James closed his eyes, letting sleep take him. The chapter of adjustments in their lives was far from over, but he was ready to turn the next page, willing to face whatever challenges came, as long as he could do so with Sarah and Emma. The morning began like any other in the Anderson apartment. James prepared coffee while Sarah helped Emma get ready for school. The familiar routine they had established over the last few weeks was comforting, an anchor amid the constant changes in their lives, but the universe had other plans for the day. James's phone rang insistently, his assistant's name flashing on the screen. Frowning, he answered, "Mr. Anderson?" Clara's agitated voice sounded on the other end. "You need to see this." Seconds later, his phone buzzed with a notification. James opened the link Clara sent and felt his stomach drop. There, on the front page of one of the biggest tabloids, was a photo of him while Sarah and Emma leaving the school. The headline screamed, "Billionaire James Anderson, secret child revealed." "Damn it," James muttered, running a hand over his face. "James, what happened?" Sarah asked, entering the kitchen with Emma. He hesitated, glancing at his daughter. "Emma, honey, why don't you get your backpack? I need to talk to your mom for a minute." As soon as Emma left, James showed the article to Sarah. She went visibly pale, her eyes scanning the text quickly. How did they find out?" she whispered. James shook his head, frustration evident in his voice. "I don't know, but this is going to complicate things." Before they could discuss it further, James's phone rang again. This time it was his mother, Elizabeth. "James Anderson." Elizabeth's cold voice cut in as soon as he answered. "Is there something you'd like to tell me?" James closed his eyes, feeling a headache forming. "Mom, now's not a good time. Can I call you later?" "No, you may not," Elizabeth answered firmly. "I'll be at your office in an hour. We need to talk." She hung up before James could protest. He glanced at Sarah, who observed him with concern. "It was my mother," he explained. "She wants me to meet her at the office." Sarah nodded slowly. "You should go. I'll take Emma to school." James hesitated. "Are you sure with all this media attention?" "We'll be fine," Sarah assured him, though James could see the worry in her eyes. "Just try to fix this, okay?" An hour later, James was in his office, facing his mother across the desk. Elizabeth Anderson was an imposing woman, her graying hair perfectly styled and her gaze enough to freeze hell. "So," she began, her voice cutting, "you have a daughter?" It wasn't a question. James nodded, meeting her gaze. "Yes, I do. Emma is 5. Elizabeth narrowed her eyes. "And you only found out now?" "It's complicated, Mum," James replied, feeling his frustration build. "But Emma is my daughter, and Sarah and I are doing our best to be a family." "A family," Elizabeth repeated, disdain evident in her tone. "James, you worked hard to get where you are. You can't just throw it all away because of a mistake from the past." James felt his blood boil. "Emma is not a mistake. She's my daughter, and I love her." The argument continued, with Elizabeth insisting James was ruining his career and reputation. When he finally managed to free himself from his mother, he was exhausted and furious. But the day was far from over. Arriving home, he found Sarah consoling a tearful Emma. Apparently, some children at school had seen the news and were teasing Emma. "They said I'm a dirty secret," Emma sobbed in James's arms, "that you didn't want me before." James felt his heart break. He hugged Emma tightly, murmuring words of comfort and love. Over the girl's head, he saw the anguished look in Sarah's eyes. That night, after putting Emma to bed, Sarah confronted James in the living room. "This isn't working," she said, her voice trembling. Maybe it's best if Emma and I leave for a while, until things calm down." James felt as though he'd been punched in the stomach. "What? No, Sarah. We can't give up now." "I'm not giving up," Sarah argued. "I'm trying to protect you, your career, your reputation." "To hell with my career," James exclaimed, surprised at his own vehemence. "You're my family. I'm not losing you again." Sarah looked at him, tears shining in her eyes. "James, there's something you need to know. Something I should have told you a long time ago." She drew a deep breath as though summoning courage. "When I found out I was pregnant, I tried to tell you. I called your office countless times, left messages, but you never returned my calls." James felt a wave of guilt crash over him. "Sarah, She raised a hand, silencing him. "Let me finish." Frustrated and desperate, "I went to your mother." James froze, a feeling of dread settling in his stomach. "Your mother received me coolly," Sarah continued. "She told me you were about to become CEO, that a child at that time would ruin your career." The words hit James like a freight train. He staggered back, collapsing heavily onto the couch. "My mother, she knew," he whispered, incredulous. Sarah nodded sadly. "She convinced me to stay away. Said it was for your good, for your career. I believed her. I thought I was doing the right thing for you." James closed his eyes, feeling a toxic mix of anger and guilt. Anger at his mother for interfering, guilt for not being there when Sarah needed him most. "Why are you telling me this now?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. Sarah sat beside him, taking his hands in hers. "Because we need to be honest with each other if this is going to work. And because I think we need to confront your mother together." James opened his eyes, meeting Sarah's determined gaze. He nodded slowly. "You're right," he said. "No more secrets. No more manipulations. We'll face this together." That night, while Emma slept peacefully in her room, James and Sarah made plans. Tomorrow, they would face Elizabeth Anderson as a united front, as a family. The road ahead would be difficult, but they were determined to overcome any obstacle, side by side. Morning arrived with palpable tension in the air. James and Sarah moved silently around the apartment, exchanging looks filled with apprehension and resolve. Emma, sensing the heavy atmosphere, was unusually quiet, her large green eyes watching her parents with a mix of curiosity and worry. "Emma, sweetheart," Sarah said softly, kneeling to meet her daughter's eyes. "Today you're going to spend the day with Aunt Susan, okay? Dad and I have something important to do." Emma nodded, biting her lower lip. "Are you two going to fight again?" James felt his heart twist at the innocent question. He joined Sarah, placing a gentle hand on Emma's shoulder. "No, princess, we're not going to fight. We just have some grown-up things to sort out. I promise that when we get back, we'll do something fun together, all right?" Emma's face lit up with a tentative smile. "Can we have a picnic in the park?" "Absolutely," Sarah replied, kissing her daughter's forehead. "Now, go grab your backpack. Susan will be here soon." When Emma left the room, James and Sarah exchanged a glance. The tension between them was palpable, but there was also a silent solidarity. They were in this battle together. "Are you sure you want to do this?" James asked, his voice low with concern. Sarah nodded, her chin raised in determination. "Yes, it's time we face this head-on. For Emma. For us." The drive to the Anderson mansion was made in tense silence. James gripped the steering wheel so tightly that his knuckles turned white. Sarah stared out the window, lost in thought, occasionally touching the pendant she wore, a gift from Emma. As they approached the imposing estate, James felt his stomach clench. So many memories were tied to this place, some good, many complicated, and now they were about to add another one to the list. The car stopped in the circular driveway of the mansion. For a moment, neither James nor Sarah moved. "Ready?" James asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Sarah looked at him, her eyes a blend of fear and determination. "As ready as I'll ever be." Together, they exited the car and walked to the front door. James hesitated for a second before ringing the bell. The sound echoed through the mansion, louder and more ominous than ever before. The door opened to reveal Elizabeth Anderson. Impeccably dressed as always, there was a tension in her shoulders that betrayed her composed appearance. "James," she said, her gaze flicking briefly over Sarah before settling back on her son. "Come in." The mansion's foyer was just as Sarah remembered, grand and intimidating. Portraits of Anderson ancestors stared down sternly from the walls, as though judging the newcomers. Elizabeth led them to the living room, an elegant space filled with antique furniture and a massive fireplace. "Sit down," she said, more a command than an invitation. James and Sarah took a seat on the sofa, instinctively sitting close together. Elizabeth took her place in the opposite armchair, her back straight and her gaze piercing. For a moment, silence reigned. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner seemed deafening. "Well," Elizabeth finally said, her voice cold and controlled, "I imagine you've come for explanations." James felt the anger he'd been suppressing bubble to the surface. "Explanations," he repeated, his voice tense. "Mother, you hid from me the fact that I had a daughter. For years." Elizabeth didn't shrink from the accusation. On the contrary, she lifted her chin, her eyes flashing with a mix of defiance and, was that regret? "I did what I thought was best for you, James," she replied, her voice firm. "You were on the verge of becoming CEO. Everything you worked for was about to come true. A child at that moment would have ruined it all." James abruptly stood, unable to contain his frustration. "You had no right to make that choice for me," he exclaimed, his voice echoing through the room. "It was my life, my daughter." Sarah placed a gentle hand on James's arm, silently urging him to calm down. He took a deep breath, trying to regain control. Elizabeth watched the interaction with sharp eyes. "I only wanted to protect your future, son," she said, her voice softening slightly. "You'd sacrificed so much, worked so hard. I couldn't let you throw it all away over a mistake." "Emma is not a mistake," Sarah interjected, her voice calm but firm. "She's a wonderful child, smart and loving. She deserved to have her father in her life from the start." Elizabeth turned her attention to Sarah, her eyes narrowing. "And you? Why did you agree to stay away? Why didn't you fight harder?" Sarah sighed, suddenly looking tired. "Because I believed you," she admitted. "I believed I was doing what was best for James, for his future. And because I was scared and alone, and you made me feel I had no choice." James looked at Sarah, feeling a surge of guilt and admiration. She had sacrificed so much, carried this burden alone for so long. "Mother," James said, turning back to Elizabeth, "can't you see how much you hurt us? How much you took from us? Years we'll never get back." Surprisingly, it was Sarah who spoke next. "Mrs. Anderson," she began, her voice unexpectedly gentle, "I understand why you did what you did. You acted as a mother, wanting to protect your son, even if you did it the wrong way." James looked at Sarah, shocked by her understanding. Elizabeth seemed surprised too, blinking rapidly as if trying to process Sarah's words. "But what's done is done," Sarah continued. "What matters now is the future. Emma deserves to know her entire family, including her grandmother." The silence that followed was broken by the sound of the front door opening. Rapid footsteps echoed in the hallway, and suddenly Emma burst into the living room, followed closely by a breathless Susan. "Mom, Dad!" Emma cried, stopping abruptly at the sight of the tense scene. Her eyes scanned the adults before settling on Elizabeth. "Who are you?" Elizabeth froze, her wide eyes fixed on Emma. It was like seeing a ghost. The child was the spitting image of James as a boy, with the same piercing green eyes and hesitant smile. "Emma," James said softly, This is your grandmother, Elizabeth." Emma tilted her head, studying Elizabeth with childlike curiosity. "Hi, Grandma," she said timidly. Elizabeth seemed to lose her composure at the greeting. Tears shone in her eyes, and for a moment, the mask of composure she always wore seemed to crack. "Hello, Emma," she replied, her voice trembling. It's a pleasure to finally meet you." James watched the interaction, filled with conflicting emotions. Part of him still seethed with anger for what his mother had done, but another part, the part that was still the boy who loved his mom, longed to forgive, to heal this family wound. Emma, oblivious to the tension between the adults, took a small step forward. Do you have pictures of Dad when he was little? Mom says I look like him. A tiny smile touched Elizabeth's lips. Yes, dear. I have many pictures. Would you like to see them? Emma nodded eagerly, and Elizabeth stood, holding out her hand to her granddaughter. Before leaving the room, she cast a look at James and Sarah, one filled with regret, a plea for forgiveness, and hope. Left alone, James pulled Sarah into a tight embrace. "Thank you," he murmured into her hair. "For your strength, for your understanding. I don't think I could have done this alone." Sarah pulled back slightly, looking into James's eyes. "We're a family now," she said softly. "We face things together." James nodded, feeling a wave of love and gratitude for this incredible woman. They still had a long way to go, many tough conversations and adjustments to make. But at that moment, watching Emma interact with Elizabeth for the first time, James felt a spark of hope. Maybe, with time and effort, they could heal the wounds of the past. Maybe they could build a future where everyone, James, Sarah, Emma, and even Elizabeth, had a place. A future filled with love, understanding, and most of all, family. The afternoon sun cast a golden light through the windows of the Anderson mansion, illuminating the living room where the family gathered. The silence that once felt tense now seemed lighter, occasionally broken by Emma's soft giggles as she flipped through a photo album with Elizabeth. James observed the scene with a mix of conflicting emotions. Seeing his daughter interact so naturally with her grandmother was surprisingly moving, yet the hurt and anger still simmered beneath the surface. Elizabeth raised her eyes from the album, meeting James's gaze. There was a vulnerability in her eyes he rarely witnessed. "James," she began, her voice trembling, I'm sorry for everything." The apology caught James off guard. His mother was a proud woman, seldom admitting mistakes. "I know what I did was unforgivable," Elizabeth continued, "but I'd like the chance to make it right, if you'll let me." James felt Sarah squeeze his hand gently, offering silent support. "I'm not sure I can forgive so easily, Mother," James replied, his voice low. "You took years from us, years we can never get back." Elizabeth nodded, accepting his harsh words. "I understand, but please, allow me to try to make amends. I want to know my granddaughter, to be part of your lives." She hesitated before adding, "And I'd also like to help with Sarah's treatment, if you'll let me." James tensed, ready to refuse, but Sarah intervened. "That would be very kind of you, Elizabeth," she said softly. "I'm sure we can discuss the details later." James looked at Sarah, surprised by her willingness to accept the offer. She gave him a small, encouraging smile. "For Emma's sake," Sarah murmured, so only James could hear. He sighed, nodding reluctantly. "All right, Mother. We can try." Elizabeth's face lit up with hope. "Thank you, James. I promise I'll do my best to earn this second chance." At that moment, Emma approached, clutching the photo album. "Dad, look, Grandma has pictures of you dressed up like the Easter Bunny." James couldn't help but smile sheepishly as Emma showed off the photo, giggling all the while. The sound of her laughter seemed to melt some of the tension in the room. In the days that followed, the family began a slow process of reconciliation. Elizabeth devoted herself to getting to know Emma, spending hours telling stories about James's childhood and learning everything about her granddaughter's likes and interests. Sarah, surprisingly, became a bridge between James and Elizabeth, smoothing rough edges and facilitating difficult conversations. Her understanding and willingness to forgive inspired James to lower his defenses. Gradually, James began to see his mother in a new light. He noticed the genuine effort she made to connect with Emma, the way her eyes softened when she watched her granddaughter play. He saw moments of vulnerability and regret he had never noticed before. One afternoon, while observing Elizabeth teach Emma how to bake cookies in the mansion's kitchen, James felt something shift inside him. The anger he'd carried for so long began to give way to a reluctant understanding. His mother had made a terrible mistake, but she was trying to fix it. "She's really trying," Sarah commented softly, joining James. He nodded, pulling Sarah closer. "Yes, she is." And I think I'm starting to see that. The path to full healing was still long, but at that moment, watching 3 generations of his family together, James felt a surge of hope. Perhaps, with time and effort, they could truly become the family they should have always been. The following months brought significant changes for the Anderson family. With James's unwavering support, Emma's care, and surprisingly Elizabeth's dedication, Sarah finally saw her health improve steadily and significantly. Hospital visits became less frequent, and the sparkle in Sarah's eyes, once dimmed by illness, returned in full force. One sunny afternoon during a routine checkup, Dr. Patel delivered the news everyone had been hoping for. "Sarah, I'm pleased to say you've fully recovered," he announced with a warm smile. The exam room erupted in joy. James hugged Sarah tightly, tears of relief and happiness in his eyes. Emma jumped up and down with excitement, while Elizabeth, who insisted on being there, smiled discreetly but with obvious satisfaction. The news seemed to mark a new chapter in their lives. With Sarah's health finally restored, the family could focus on building a future together without the constant shadow of illness looming over them. For James, the months of close contact with his mother had been a journey of self-discovery and forgiveness. Watching Elizabeth strive to make amends, seeing her interact affectionately with Emma, and offering genuine support to Sarah gradually melted the barriers he'd built up. One evening, while they strolled through the mansion's gardens after a family dinner, James finally expressed his feelings to Elizabeth. "Mom," he began softly, "I want you to know, I understand now. I understand why you did what you did, even if I don't agree with the decision." Elizabeth stopped, turning to face her son with tearful eyes. "James, Let me finish," he gently interrupted. "You acted out of love, thinking you were protecting me and my future. And though it was a mistake, I know it came from a place of love. And for that, I forgive you." The tears Elizabeth had been holding back finally fell. Without speaking, she pulled James into an embrace, one that carried years of regret, love, and now hope. That moment marked a turning point in the family dynamic. Feeling truly accepted again, Elizabeth threw herself even more into helping plan the family's future. She became a valuable source of advice and support, especially when James began to consider the next big step in his relationship with Sarah. It was during a picnic in the park, a promise kept for Emma, that James realized he didn't want to wait any longer. Watching Sarah laugh carelessly while playing with Emma, he knew the moment was right. That night, after Emma was tucked into bed, James led Sarah to the apartment balcony. The city lights sparkled in the distance, creating a romantic backdrop. "Sarah," he began, his heart pounding, "these past months have been, well, a roller coaster. But in all the highs and lows, one thing became crystal clear to me. I don't want to spend a single day without you and Emma." Sarah looked at him with wide eyes, beginning to realize where the conversation was headed. James dropped to one knee, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. "Sarah Thompson, will you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Of officially forming the family we should have always been?" With tears shining in her eyes and a radiant smile, Sarah answered, "Yes, James, 1,000 times, yes." The couple sealed the moment with a passionate kiss, years of love, separation, and reunion, culminating in this perfect instant. The news of the engagement was met with great excitement by Emma, who could barely contain her happiness at the thought that her parents were finally getting married. Elizabeth, upon being informed, surprised everyone with her enthusiastic reaction. "That's wonderful," she exclaimed, embracing Sarah warmly. Then, with a twinkle in her eye, she added, "And I have the perfect idea for the ceremony." James and Sarah exchanged curious glances. "Why not hold the wedding here at the mansion?" Elizabeth suggested. "In the gardens, perhaps. It would be a beautiful symbol of a new beginning for our family." The proposal took the couple by surprise. James looked at Sarah for her reaction. After a moment of reflection, she smiled and nodded. "I think it would be perfect," she said softly. James felt his heart swell with love and gratitude. Here they were, planning their future together, with the support and blessing of the entire family. It was more than he had ever dared to dream. As wedding preparations began, James couldn't help but reflect on the journey that had brought them there. From the shadows of the past to the light of the present, they had faced challenges, overcome obstacles, and found their way back to each other. Now, with Emma dancing excitedly at the thought of being a flower girl, Sarah radiant by his side, and Elizabeth fully immersed in wedding planning, James knew they had finally come home. The future spread out before them, shining with promise, a new story waiting to be written. Dawn arrived with a gentle breeze that made the leaves of the centuries-old trees dance across the vast grounds of the Anderson mansion. The sky, a tapestry of pastel hues, seemed to herald the arrival of a new chapter in the family's life. The air was charged with anticipation and an almost tangible sense of new beginnings. James woke early, his heart pounding with a mix of nerves and excitement. Today was the day he and Sarah would finally formalize their union, sealing not just their love, but also the extraordinary journey that had led them here. Adjusting his tie for the umpteenth time in front of the mirror, he couldn't help recalling every event that had brought him to this moment. On the other side of the mansion, Sarah was being assisted by a small army of women. Her mother adjusted the veil with trembling hands. Longtime friends applied the finishing touches to her makeup and hair. And, to everyone's surprise, Elizabeth Anderson stood by with words of encouragement and comfort. "How you look absolutely stunning, dear," Elizabeth said, her eyes brimming with tears she held back. Sarah smiled, still marveling at how her relationship with James's mother had transformed. "Thank you, Elizabeth, for everything." A minor commotion at the door announced Emma's arrival, dressed in an adorable flower girl dress. Her eyes widened at the sight of her mother. "Mom, you look like a princess." Sarah knelt carefully, mindful of her dress, and pulled Emma into a hug. "And you, my love, look like a fairy from a storybook." The distant chime of bells signaled that the time had come. Sarah took a deep breath, feeling a wave of emotions wash over her. Joy, nervousness, love, all swirling in her chest. "Are you ready?" Elizabeth asked softly. Sarah nodded, her smile growing wider. More than ever. In the garden, guests were already seated. Soft classical music filled the air, blending with birdsong and the whisper of leaves. James stood at the makeshift altar, his best friend and best man at his side, offering quiet reassurances. When the music changed to signal the bride's entrance, everyone turned. Emma appeared first, scattering rose petals along the path, her smile lighting up the entire garden. James felt his heart swell with love at the sight of his daughter, the living bond that had reunited him with Sarah. And then there she was, Sarah, radiant in her white gown, walking slowly through the floral aisle. But what took James's breath away wasn't merely the sight of his bride, but who accompanied her. Elizabeth, tears in her eyes and a genuine smile on her face, guided Sarah by the arm. The image was powerful. Elizabeth leading Sarah to the altar was more than a wedding tradition. It was a symbol of acceptance, forgiveness, and a new beginning for the entire family. It was living proof that time and genuine love can heal even the deepest wounds. Upon reaching the altar, Elizabeth kissed Sarah's cheek before placing her hand in James's. The moment was laden with emotion. Years of misunderstandings and heartaches finally laid to rest. "Take good care of her," Elizabeth whispered to James, her voice thick with emotion. James nodded, unable to speak around the lump in his throat. He held Sarah's hand tighter, their gazes locking in a look that spoke more than any words could. The ceremony was simple but deeply moving. James and Sarah exchanged vows that spoke not only of love, but of perseverance, second chances, and the family they had built together. Emma stood by them, holding the rings and occasionally making adorable remarks that drew laughter from the guests. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, the garden erupted in applause and cheers. James pulled Sarah into a passionate kiss, while Emma jumped for joy beside them. It was a scene of pure happiness, a family finally whole and united. The reception that followed was a lively celebration of love and new beginnings. The Anderson Mansion's garden, once a symbol of tradition and at times separation, now pulsed with life and joy. Elegantly decorated tables dotted the lawn, and twinkling lights hung from the trees, creating a magical atmosphere as day faded into night. During the reception, James surprised everyone with a special announcement. Asking for the guests' attention, he climbed onto a small stage, with Sarah and Emma at his side. "Today is a day of celebration," he began, his voice rich with emotion, "not just for the love between Sarah and me, but for the incredible journey that brought us here. A journey that taught us about forgiveness, second chances, and the power of family love." He paused, glancing affectionately at Sarah and Emma before continuing. "Our story made us realize there are many families out there facing similar challenges. Parents and children separated by circumstances, misunderstandings, or difficult choices. That's why Sarah and I have decided to create the New Beginnings Foundation." A ripple of surprise and approval spread through the crowd. "This foundation will aim to help families reconnect, offering legal, emotional, and financial support to those seeking a second chance to be a family." Sarah stepped forward to continue the announcement. "We believe every family deserves the opportunity for healing and reconciliation that we've had. The New Beginnings Foundation will be our way of giving back and spreading hope." The applause that followed was immediate and enthusiastic. Many guests approached with offers of support and ideas for the new initiative. At that moment, Elizabeth approached the stage, a determined expression on her face. "James, Sarah," she called, joining them. "I'd like to offer my help in leading the foundation's charitable efforts." James looked at his mother, surprised and moved. "Mother, are you sure?" Elizabeth nodded, a soft smile on her lips. "More than ever. I spent years making decisions that negatively affected our family. Now, I want to devote my time to helping other families avoid the same mistakes." Her offer was more than a gesture of goodwill. It was a testament to her own journey of redemption, a genuine desire to turn past mistakes into something positive for the future. Sarah was the first to respond, pulling Elizabeth into a tight hug. James joined in, and soon Emma was there too, creating a group embrace that perfectly symbolized their shared path of healing and unity. The party continued late into the night, full of laughter, dancing, and celebration. James and Sarah shared their first dance as a married couple, their eyes never leaving each other as they twirled beneath the twinkling lights. Emma took turns dancing with both grandfathers, her contagious laughter echoing through the garden. As the night wore on, guests began to leave, leaving behind an atmosphere of joy and fresh starts. The Anderson family, however, remained in the garden, none of them wanting the perfect day to end. It was Elizabeth who suggested they take advantage of the moonlight for a small family picnic. In a matter of minutes, blankets were spread on the soft grass, and a selection of wedding desserts was brought outside. There, under the starlit sky, 3 generations of the Anderson family gathered. Elizabeth and James's father played with Emma, teaching her to spot constellations. Sarah's parents shared funny stories from her childhood, making everyone laugh. James and Sarah watched the scene, their hearts full. Sitting side by side, hands intertwined, they soaked up every detail of this precious moment. "Can you believe it?" Sarah whispered, resting her head on James's shoulder. "After everything we've been through, here we are, all of us." James kissed the top of her head, a wave of gratitude washing over him. "It's more than I ever dared hope for," he admitted. "And yet, it feels so right." They watched Emma run back to Elizabeth, begging to be lifted up so she could see the stars better. The scene, their daughter in the arms of the grandmother who once separated them, was a powerful reminder of how far they had come. "You know," James reflected, "as painful as our journey was, I wouldn't change a thing. Every challenge, every obstacle brought us here, made us who we are." Sarah nodded in understanding. "It taught us the value of forgiveness, of perseverance, showed us that true love can overcome anything." At that moment, as if sensing she was the subject of their conversation, Emma ran back to her parents. She flopped down between them, her little body warm and her laughter infectious. "Mom, Dad, Grandma said we can do this every month. Can we?" "Please?" James and Sarah exchanged amused looks before answering in unison, "Of course we can, sweetheart." Emma let out a squeal of delight before snuggling between her parents, her eyes already starting to droop with the day's excitement. There, under the starry canopy, with the gentle hum of family chatter in the background and Emma's comforting weight between them, James and Sarah felt a profound sense of peace settle over them. It was as though the universe had finally aligned all the pieces, placing them exactly where they were meant to be. The Anderson family, once fragmented and marred by secrets and hurts, was finally whole. More than that, it was at peace, healed, united not just by blood, but by a shared journey of redemption and unconditional love. As the night deepened and the stars shone overhead, James and Sarah knew that this was not an ending, but a new beginning. A beginning full of promise, of shared dreams, and of a love that had stood the test of time and adversity. And so, in the same garden where, just hours before, they had exchanged vows of everlasting love, the Anderson family celebrated not just a wedding, but the rebirth of something precious, a second chance, a new chapter, a love story that was only just beginning.